Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Angela Love Zarenka, and I am a board certified lactation consultant, and I work with lactation education resources today. And our topic is Real Talk, the realities of becoming an IBCLC.
And I am Sakita Lewis Johnson. I am also an IBCLC. I am the lead nurse planner and instructor, one of the instructors for LER. So welcome, welcome. Glad to have you and thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. So just a little bit of a background. I have been doing lactation support in the community for over 30 years, come from a mother support background. I also have worked in a hospital. I have worked in a private practice, have run a private practice. And so I've had quite an interesting path, which has brought me to this point, which brought me to the point of being an IBCLC and how I continue to serve lactation consultants around the world and wannabe aspiring lactation consultants around the world. Sakita, how about you?
Well, I have similar background. I come from initially a nursing background in labor and delivery, and felt like my best work was right after delivery, helping with that first latch. Uh, and so a lot of things transpired, but I am glad to be an IBCLC. I have a private practice myself. I also work in the community now. I've had the bulk of my experience, of course, has been in the hospital. So primarily now, though, I'm out in the community and doing what I love to do.
Excellent, thanks. So we're going to go ahead and just sort of walk through all of the pathways. We're going to walk through the education. We're going to walk through all the different steps which are involved. And so if you do have a question, please ask. We have Wendy who is monitoring the questions box. And so if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat. Wendy will answer it, and Sakita and I will keep an eye on it so that if there's anything that comes up, we will bring it forward. This call is being recorded. And so that way, for anyone who's watching this later on, you can hopefully gather that wisdom that Wendy is going to put in the chat, as well as what we're able to share with you today. There is a handout, which is part of the handouts. If you click on the handout section, you can download that handout, which has a lot of really helpful websites and resources on the handout that we'll be reviewing today. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can post your questions in the comments section. We will be monitoring it, so we will bring those forward and answer those, as well as you too have access to this handout. So please do take a look at the handout. Also, you can contact our amazing support team, of which Wendy is a member, at the email address of support@lactationtraining.com. So that is the easiest way to get us. We do monitor that 7 days a week. So becoming a lactation consultant is something which is the topic of today, and actually it fuels our passion, right? We really do love supporting breastfeeding, chest feeding families and those who are providing human milk for their babies. And we are not alone. There are over 32,000 IBCLCs in over 120 countries. And so it really makes me proud to know that the credential that I hold is something which is international. So credentialing is offered by the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners. I'll refer to it during the call as IBLCE. So do take a look at their website. It's IBLCE.org. They have different regional offices depending on where in the world you reside or you work. So you want to review the requirements and the pathways to become eligible to take the IBLCE certification exam. And so what do you need to know? Well, there's something called a detailed content outline. It was also known as an exam blueprint, and it's based on surveys of IBCLCs in various practice settings around the globe. The outline covers all of the topic areas and the chronological stages that we need to know in their work. LER, our courses cover the entire detailed content outline, and they are approved by LARC, which is I have to look as well, the Lactation Education Accreditation and Approval Review Committee, LARC. Some people call it LER. That's the organization that evaluates and approves lactation consultants training courses. So one of the questions to ask yourself today is, Sakita,
Yes, so before we dive in today, and while we're speaking, you want to keep at the forefront of your mind a couple of questions. And before I say these questions, I want you to know we're about to give you tons of information, and that's okay, because we want you to be equipped and to really understand the realities of what this entails. So please don't feel overwhelmed, because again, you have supportive services here at LER. You can ask all the questions, but just keep these things in mind. Do I have the skills necessary to become an IBCLC? And if not, where will I acquire these skills? So keep that in mind, and we're going to dive on in. Next slide, Angela. So what makes an IBCLC? You see this little lonesome slide. It says competency. Competency is a critically necessary. It is so critically necessary to provide adequate and appropriate lactation support. Competency ensures that you have the necessary ability, knowledge, and the skills to do it successfully. And so competency is here alone as a starter, as a kickoff, because Angela alluded to the things that you need to know. There are competencies that you will need to have in order to sit for the exam, as well as, you know, what's expected of an IBCLC. Next slide, please. Culturally appropriate. Culturally appropriate care, and you'll see this in some of the literature. It says culturally relevant. Some people say culturally competent. I don't believe that you can become ever competent in someone else's culture, but I say culturally appropriate because culturally appropriate, it starts with cultural humility. And cultural humility is defined as a process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but starts with an examination of his, her, or their own beliefs and cultural identities. And so, you know, sometimes in lactation land, we hear things like, oh, this set of people don't do this because it's a part of their culture. Try to avoid that at all possible, because that is really not being in touch with yourself, because within culture, we know that there are subcultures. So you can never say, you know, so it starts with that piece of self-reflection. The other thing is you have to be credible in order to be an IBCLC. So when you're asked a question that you don't know, do you try to answer off whim based on your lived experience, or do you know the evidence, or do you know where to go and get the evidence to that which you're being asked? And that's critical, because, you know, when you're asked a question, you know, it's easy to say, oh, I had this breastfeeding experience and this is how it was and this is how it should be. No, what does the evidence say to what you're being asked? Because we know that uh, all of our experiences and lived experiences are different. And so, are you credible? Do you give the answers that that you can have a resource that you can go to, and the answer would be just that. Next slide. So as I'm going through these are all qualities and characteristics. I want you to keep in mind that that the things that I'm going to say are not all encompassing. There's a long list of what really makes an IBCLC, but these are the core things as to who we are. And so when you look at policy advisor or creator, one of the things of being an IBCLC is you have the passion and the knowledge. And so there's nothing worse than people creating policies who know nothing about what we do as lactation consultants. And so you become the expert in helping to build realistic policy and helping to advise realistic policy. And along with that is being an advocate for what you do, what we do, human milk for human babies. And an advocate is someone who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. And so those two go hand in hand, but that's another core characteristic of being an IBCLC or becoming an IBCLC. Sometimes don't be afraid if you're not strong in advocacy. There's something about lactation that you hang around long enough, you will be like, this is what it is. So just, keep that in mind, that advocacy skills, you build up on those, but at the core, that's the essence of who we are, and that helps us to inform policies, not just on your local levels, but also on national and global levels. Next slide, please. Problem solver and researcher. Problem solver, when I think about being a lactation consultant, the first thing I think is one size never fits all. You have to be able to problem solve different and individual characteristics of the families and of situations that you come across in lactation land. Simply because, yes, there are basics, and yes, there are out of the norms, and yes, there are super out of the norms, and you have to be able to be that problem solver. Along with that is being a researcher. And so with that, a researcher can be a person who carries out academic or scientific research, or it could be just a person whose job is discovering or verifying information. I still come across cases where I have to go and look it up. I have to go figure out and research, like, whoa, this is something that I've never dealt with before. So let me do some digging. And so that's what I mean by being a researcher, is that, again, it comes with that problem solver. There's this individualization that we have to do, and that is what lends credibility to each case that we're involved in. Next slide. High level lactation care. When I talk about high level lactation care, I mean truly things out of the ordinary, and that goes along with skilled. So skilled is not just doing something, but do you have the knowledge to take it to that next level? Will you have the knowledge to, for instance, be able to manage someone who is with a tube down their throat, who said, or intubated on life support, who's made clear that they want to provide milk for their baby. So those are the types of things I'm talking about. A lot of times, sometimes people believe that lactation consulting is just going from room to room and latching babies. Yep, it's a lot more than that, okay? It is a lot more than that. It is really possessing the skill level to handle tough cases, to handle those special cases. And that's what sets an IBCLC apart, is having the knowledge and the skill set to be able to handle, when we talk about high level care, things that fall way out of the ordinary, but we still help and we still try to find solutions to make it possible for the family to meet whatever goals that they've set for themselves. Next slide. Essential and timely. This word essential is near and dear now, especially because of the pandemic. As I think about when the pandemic first hit, how families were scrambling, how we know in the infant feeding world is that, there's infant feeding during emergencies that, yes, human milk, breastfeeding, chest feeding is all a part of, particularly during emergencies. And so I found out that, yes, we are essential. And I also found out that telehealth sometimes just doesn't cut it. And so having to pivot and make the switch and say, how can I still serve our community that have these great needs, during this time. And what it required is me saying, yep, okay, I need PPE. I need all of these things. I need to use the LER screening tools on when it's safe to go into the home and when it's safe to, maybe you should pause, and really using a forethought to the timeliness of the time you can get to a client. If a person has lactation issues, they need assistance, and the lack thereof can make or break their feeding journey, and can impact and can have a lasting impact. And so they go together. Lactation support is timely, and not getting to someone in a time that is necessary can kill the confidence of that family and can lead to other issues. Sometimes it leads to a person becoming depressed, because this is what we as a advocate of breastfeeding, we've said, yes, breastfeed, 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 and then we can't get to that person in a timely manner. That just it really hurts. So from an advocacy standpoint, you have to be timely if someone calls for assistance, and knowing what type of assistance they need and helping to figure that out in a way that we can help meet their needs. Next slide, please. So being a collaborative care partner, remember that you are the lactating family's partner. Your goals do not take precedence over theirs. Their goals, their fears, their barriers are all valid, and those are what we have to take into consideration with each and every family that we serve. So we are collaborating with them. We're not taking over. We're not saying, well, it's recommended for 6 months exclusive, blah, blah, blah. You have to get to the core of what the family's goals are, what their barriers are, what their subjective world looks like, what their fears look like, what their support is. And that's how you become trusted. That's how you become a trusted member of whatever community you're serving. Because when you go in with the attitude or with the fortitude that you know it all, you know what this family needs, you've got it, you have to be willing to be a collaborative care partner. Because when you are able to do that, you do no harm, and you will be considered reliable and trustworthy. Next slide, please. So along with collaborative care partner, there's person-centered care, and you will see collaboration on this slide. The Institute of Medicine defines patient-centered care as providing care that is respectful of and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs, and values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decisions. So there it is right there. All of the things that I've been talking about, this sums it up. The 4 C's of this model are culture. Culture is the customs, values, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. Now, culture does not equate to stereotype. So remember, I said there are subcultures, right? Then there's care as part of the model. How do you care? What is your role in caring? For instance, when I think about this, there are people who say hands-off approach, don't touch the client. And then there are some clients who just want you to touch them, and they just want to be hands-off, right? What is your care approach to these things? And these are things that are really, you have to think about, because it's going to be individual as far as the type of care you provide, and it should be person-centered. Communication. Effective communication is everything. And one thing that I've been reading a lot about is how our communication, how it can be perceived as bias. Some of the things that we say, some of the language that we use. How effective is your communication? How well do you communicate? That's a skill set. That's part of it. And then I talked about that collaborative piece, is that shared decision making. The person is the center of all that we do, and keeping that in mind. Next slide, Pete, please. So a little bit of anticipatory guidance. I started with 2 questions to ask yourself. I'm going to end with 2 questions to ask yourself today. Angela's going to talk about the pathways. When she's speaking about the pathways and what it takes, a couple things you want to think about. What are some things to consider before you start this journey? Like, what does the job market look like in your area? What are your plans? How do you plan to use the IBCLC? Do you want to do private practice? Do you plan to work in a hospital, in a pediatrician's office? Do you plan to do something altogether different? Do you plan to be a researcher in academia? So think about those things. What does lactation support look like in your area? Is it saturated? Is it not? Is it lacking? I don't think any area is saturated, by the way. But there are some requirements that are needed before taking the exam. And so one of the things you want to ask yourself, does this fit into my lifestyle with job, family, school, work, all of those things? Will I be able to get the hours? And if so, how do I plan to do this? How do I plan to structure it? So those are the types of things that you want to ask yourself when Angela is speaking about the pathways, and even reflecting afterward. I would say write these questions down, and then after you hear Angela, try to piece these pieces together so that you are clear in what your goals are and how you're going to achieve them, because we want you to be successful. And that's why we're here today, to help you kind of weed out all of these, the information that is necessary to move forward. Angela, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sakita. All brilliant, fantastic observations. And indeed, planning these things out is something which is super important. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about, this is what the roadmap looks like. This is just a general graphic, and it can feel really complicated, but I'm going to break it down and give you this roadmap. So the things that you have to look for, first thing you need to do is choose a pathway. So we'll come back to this in a minute, and each pathway has 3 components. One is the education, one is the clinical hours, and then you're going to do exam prep. So those are the things that you need to consider as you're walking along this journey. So first, we're going to talk about getting ready for the exam. So it's the first thing, right? So the first component is your health sciences education. So it includes the typical education for healthcare providers. There are 8 post-secondary or university level courses and 6 general education courses. Now you can find a full list of each of the 14 subjects on the IBLCE website. You can search for it, or you can find the link in the resource document that we've given you. So the 8 university level courses, and you don't need to write these down because it's listed everywhere, they include biology, anatomy, physiology, infant and child growth and development, introduction to clinical research, nutrition, psychology or counseling skills or communication skills, and finally, sociology or cultural sensitivity or cultural anthropology. So these courses can either be online or in person, as long as the institution is accredited to provide this learning. So if you took any of these courses during your college career, they count, even if it was 20 years ago. Now, LER partners with Walden University to provide the basic courses. The advantage of working with Walden is that they're online, they're accredited, their courses have been chosen by us, and you can apply for financial aid. The 6 general education subjects are medical documentation, medical terminology, occupational safety and security for health professionals, professional ethics for health professionals, universal safety precautions, and infection control, and basic life support. So 5 of the 6 general ed courses can be taken through LER. The only one you will need to search for in your community is basic life support. Now, in many countries, there's an in-person skills check for this training. I have heard of some organizations providing this training completely online, so it's important to check with your local resources. In the resources handout, there is a link to the Health Sciences Education Guide, which are all the subjects I just mentioned. So now be mindful that when you're taking a look at that guide, it's only a general description of what is of each course. Keep in mind that the IBLCE is international. The names used in their documents to describe the courses may not exactly fit the description of the course at your accredited university. It's okay. IBLCE utilizes broad terms with the understanding that there is no universal description for what a course in clinical research will cover. So why are these 14 courses required? The IBLCE is a standalone credential, meaning you do not need another certification, degree, or license to practice as an IBLCE. Once you pass the exam, you will be an allied healthcare professional. The courses will help you to be prepared for your career as well as to help you pass the IBLCE exam. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second part, which is lactation-specific education. So this is where we've got you covered. The education should be comprehensive and cover the IBLCE detailed content outline. IBLCE requires at least 90 hours of lactation education and 5 hours on communication skills. Our 5-hour course is specific to lactation and breastfeeding care to help you in your practice as a lactation consultant. So the third thing to keep in mind, and the third thing to cover, is the clinical hours. So this is lactation-specific clinical experience, and this can include in-person consultations, telephone consultations, or online breastfeeding and lactation care that supports breastfeeding, chest feeding, and families providing human milk for their babies. Also includes lactation assistance to pregnant and breastfeeding clients and lactation education to families and or professionals. These hours are to be obtained within the 5 years immediately prior to applying for the exam. And so how many hours do you need? Well, that depends on which pathway you choose. So the amount of clinical experience required to sit the exam depends on which pathway you choose, as I just said. The hours needed can be accrued in the 5 years prior to applying for the exam. So we have pathway 1, which is for healthcare professionals and those who provide breastfeeding support through an IBLCE recognized breastfeeding support counselor organization. Healthcare professionals include physicians, nurses, midwives, dietitians, physical therapists, speech pathologists, and others. Breastfeeding support counselors include those accredited through organizations such as La Leche League International, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, the Breastfeeding Mothers Support Group in Singapore, among others. As of today, there are over 40 organizations that have applied to IBLCE and are approved. You can find an updated list on the IBLCE website. Pathway 2 applicants must complete a comprehensive academic program in human lactation and breastfeeding through an accredited university program. Their education has both didactic and the clinical components, and they require 300 clinical supervised hours working with breastfeeding families. Pathway 3 is a structured mentorship program between an IBCLC and the applicant. The IBCLC or IBCLCs must be in good standing with IBLCE. Those who choose this pathway must have their program pre-approved by IBLCE prior to beginning their clinical hours. And I understand that this is happening relatively quickly now, like within a few weeks. A quick note, for those of you who have breastfed or chest fed or provided human milk for your child, the hours you spent nursing, pumping, and helping your friends does not count towards the clinical hours. Sorry. Now, while 500 or 1,000 hours seems like a lot, there's a good reason why. Each candidate needs to have the clinical experience so they can provide competent care as an IBCLC. And if it's any consolation, the number of required clinical hours was much more. I've known IBCLCs who needed anywhere from 2,500 to 8,000 clinical hours to sit the IBLCE exam. So while this seems a lot, it may be a little consolation to know that it used to be much more. So pathway 1. Candidates who are applying for the IBLCE exam through pathway 1 need at least 1,000 clinical hours. For the candidate who is also a healthcare provider, the hours can be done in a hospital, birth center, clinic, lactation care center or practice, a primary care practitioner's clinic or practice, or through independent practice as a licensed or registered healthcare professional in a non-healthcare setting. For breastfeeding support counselors from an IBLCE recognized organization, their hours can be earned in person or online. The location and type of support depends on the criteria provided by the recognized organization. Hours earned before the 1st of January of 2022 are counted at a flat rate. For in-person care, it's 500 hours per 12 months. For telephone or online care, it's 250 hours per 12 months. After 1 January of 2022, the hours will be counted on an hour-by-hour basis. So the two important points about the clinical hours. One, it's important for you to document the hours you accrue as you accrue them, even if you're allowed to have that flat rate as a breastfeeding support organization. Still, do document your hours. Be very detailed in case IBLCE chooses to audit your application to take the exam, because they're going to want to know, whether or not you actually completed those hours. Another note is that the 1,000 hours do not need to be directly supervised. So Pathway 3 requires 500 hours of clinical experience, and this experience must be directly supervised by a board-certified lactation consultant or an IBCLC in good standing. It's best done in a busy practice setting where you can work with many breastfeeding, chest-feeding people and those providing human milk for their babies each day, such as a hospital or clinic setting. Now, there is an application for this pathway. It must be planned and approved by the IBLCE before you embark on your program. The hours count towards the 500 only when you're actually working with families. So the observation hours do not count. The clinical experience is graduated. That is, it starts with observation, then doing tasks under supervision, then completing tasks independently with the IBCLC nearby to ask questions and discuss situations. I recently had a conversation with Amy Black, who is our clinical internship director, and we agree that most people spend about 75 hours in orientation before you and the IBCLC feel comfortable with having you work more independently and to begin to accrue the 500 hours. Take a look in your community to find a willing internship site or mentors. You may need to reach out to many people to find someone with the time, experience, and capacity to agree to be your mentor. It's important to find a good fit. Talk to others who've been through Pathway 3 to find successful strategies in finding a good mentor. If you are interested in this pathway, go to the IBLCE website and download the Pathway 3 Plan Guide. Find a mentor, complete the application, they do need to sign it, and submit it to the IBLCE. IBLCE must approve your plan before you can begin to accrue those hours. However, you can start with observing the IBCLC while IBLCE is reviewing your application. LER has an internship program with sites around the United States. You can reach out to our internship director to find out more information. So now this pathway has that extra step or two, and so some people are asking, is it worth it? And the answer is yes. Why? Because IBLCE reports that students who come through Pathway 3 score best on the exam. I believe it's that mentorship and that dialogue with the experienced clinician that's really key. Learning from that person is well worth the extra effort involved at the beginning of this pathway. So now I want to take a moment and talk about the interim guidance from IBLCE regarding telehealth. And so during this pandemic, some people were concerned and were curious as to how they could accrue their clinical hours. And the short answer to this question is yes. IBLCE has said yes. I'm going to read to you the longer answer, which I'm paraphrasing here from the IBLCE documents, just to be very clear. In part, they say, during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, IBLCE published specific guidance about attaining clinical hours when face-to-face interactions were curtailed to reduce the spread of COVID-19. The documents are dated 17 April and 6 October of 2020. The guidance provides information on how clinical eligibility requirements could be met by leveraging technology. IBLCE will allow the use of technology if certain parameters are met and are allowed by your practice setting and by the IBCLC guiding practice documents, such as the scope of practice, the Code of Professional Conduct, and the clinical competencies for the practice of IBCLCs. The key provisions include attention to privacy, security, assessment, demonstration and evaluation of relevant techniques, provision of evidence-based information to clients, as well as appropriate collaboration with or referral to other healthcare providers. Particularly emphasized is Principle 3.2 of the Code of Professional Conduct, which requires advanced written consent from the breastfeeding parent prior to photographing, recording, or taping, audio or video, that parent or the child. Another important point about the use of technology for Pathway 3 interns is that there should be, quote, observation using technology with two-way synchronous audio and visual components. The focus is on the mentor, providing the mentoring and guidance to the applicant. And candidates in Pathway 3 mentorship programs may earn 100% of their minimum of 500 hours of directly supervised lactation-specific clinical practice through technology platforms. Now, this guidance has been extended until 30 September of 2021. It's important to read all of the documents listed in the interim guidance. The link to the guidance can be found in the resource document which accompanies this video. Okay. So going back to the lactation-specific education requirements. So we have a comprehensive program that covers the 90 hours. So the two courses that we have, so we have the Lactation Consultant Training Program, and we also have two others that are broken down as part of that. So this 90 hours is eligible for both CERPs, which is from IBLCE, CME for physicians and advanced practice nurses, nursing contact hours, and CEs from ACNM. So that is the 90-hour course. It is prepared, it covers that detailed content outline that I mentioned before, and it's to prepare you for practice. Now, our courses, our education is taught by more than 35 of the most, in my humble opinion, knowledgeable, experienced instructors who are practicing. They're lactation consultants, they're researchers, and they're authors who teach for our courses. The nice thing about it is that it's online and it is at your own time. Our classes are economical. You don't need to travel to another city. You don't need to deal with hotel expenses, leaving your family for a week, or taking time off from work. Furthermore, our online course is convenient. You can study at home at a time that works for you. You can study at your own pace, even go back and review something you didn't catch the first time through. Not everything is crammed into that short period of time of overwhelming study. Also know that our tech team works very hard to access the content on a variety of devices. I've seen people who have used their phone when they're waiting in a carpool line, waiting for their kids in a carpool line. I've known others who are able to look on their tablet while they were at work, at their day job, and they're on their lunch break, and they took their tablet with them to work, and so they're able to actually look at the courses and the content on that. And so we do work very hard to ensure that our content is accessible on a variety of platforms. Now, remember, we taught in-person training for 15 years, and we still do. And we found that students left the program really dazed with too much information condensed into that short period of time. So we think that spreading out the classes helps with comprehension and retention of that information. Work on the modules whenever that small window of time becomes available, and you can integrate the information into your practice as you go. So if you have a question for the instructor or you want to discuss a concept with your fellow students, just go to the Virtual Student Center to ask. We have a very active Facebook group where our students can meet and support each other along the way. We also have IBCLCs who can answer those questions. So not only your peers, but also experienced clinicians like Sakita and myself. Sometimes we'll get tapped to answer a question which is in the chat. So we are here to help with that. So upon completion of the 90-hour course, you're eligible to take the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. The exam is included in the price. Once you pass, you are a certified breastfeeding specialist. This is to recognize you for the level of education you have attained. With this certification, you can begin to collect your clinical hours towards the IBLCE exam. So now we have two programs that are broken out into the core and our bridge program. So basically they have the same advantages as the LCTP course. They're self-paced, online, taught by those same wonderful instructors. Our customer support team is available 7 days a week, and people who register for these courses are able to join our Facebook group. They're created for people who are working towards their IBCLC. Now, our initial course is called the core course because it will provide you with the core lactation education you need to understand what it means to begin supporting the normal course of breastfeeding. It's 54 hours of online education. It covers the basics such as anatomy and physiology, infant growth and development, supporting the preterm baby, medications and breastfeeding, and many more. At the end of the course is the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. Once you successfully complete the exam, you are a certified breastfeeding specialist and can begin to accrue your hours towards the IBLCE exam. The bridge course is ideal for people who have the basic lactation education components and need an additional 45 hours to qualify for the IBLCE exam. Topics in our bridge course include legal and ethical concerns for the lactation consultant, infant feeding and disasters, breastfeeding the infant with medical challenges, case studies, and clinical skills videos. So if you're not sure where to start, if you're new to the profession, I would suggest the core course. Get your feet wet to see if becoming an IBCLC really fuels that passion. So as I've said before, our content is online and it's on your own time. We have over 35 expert instructors with real-world experience, and we are here to support your journey. Also understand that several members of our customer support team includes IBCLCs. So they get it. They know your journey and they want to support you in that journey. You can get your content questions answered by those experts in the field. For example, last week, someone reached out to one of our instructors with a question from her own practice. We made the connection and the former student received the answer that they needed to help their client. Another student had a question about creating a policy at their hospital, and we found the appropriate instructor to answer the question and provide those additional resources. So we're here to support you. Some people are even surprised. We actually have a phone number and we answer our phone. So Wendy is helping us today because she's not on the phones. Somebody else, Julie, is probably on the phones right now, or Kim is on the phones right now. So we are here to answer those questions because sometimes you just need to talk to someone. Our support forum is something, though, that is monitored 7 days a week. And so we have several people, our tech people, our IBCLCs, everyone who actually checks that support in order to ensure that your questions are answered. Great. So as I have been talking, I know, Sakita, you've been keeping an eye on the chat. I know Wendy has as well. Did you see anything in the chat that we should bring forward? And, may I say, I really do applaud, thank you for joining us today. I really do applaud your commitment to chest feeding, breastfeeding, and families who are providing human milk for their babies. We are here to support your journey in providing that excellent, skilled lactation care in your community. So, Sakita, what questions did we have?
Yeah, so thank you to also for joining us. So there was a couple questions that were centered on how can I make a living off of, is this worth me becoming an IBCLC? And what I would say to that is, depending on the market, remember I had those questions before, meaning, are you inside of an area that you have somewhat of a coalition of folks to be able to glean what your area looks like as far as lactation support? Based on what an individual says is their cost of living, and that's why this is kind of a difficult question to answer. I think it's worth it, right? But I come from a different lens, and so along that lines, someone asked the question of, can you explain the difference between public and private. When we say private practice, private practice means you have your own lactation business. It is your business. It is what you do, how you bill, how you get informed consent. Everything is on you. Everything. If you work in, for instance, a pediatrician's office, or somewhere like a WIC office, things that would be considered, you're in the public sector. If you worked in a hospital setting, public area. Private practice is simply your own business you build from ground up. Now, whether it's worth it is, again, depending on what your goals are and depending on what the market looks like for you, depending on your background. Also, a lot of it weighs into that. And so I hope that somewhat answers. Angela, you might have something to add to this as well.
Well, and I do want to say, do your market research and figure out what you can do. I've known actually somebody who works on our staff who, when they couldn't get a job as an IBCLC in their community, and they actually moved. They found a job somewhere else, and they've moved with their family and 4 kids to that area. In my area, I work exclusively as an IBCLC. I have worked in a hospital for 18 years. And so in my area, having people who are exclusively IBCLCs, it's a thing. And so just to say that, find out what your community can support. Sometimes it may take you actually reaching out to that facility where you really want to work, right? That's your dream job and you really want to work there. Reach out to them first and find out what the landscape is. And, even in my community where we have a few hospitals who require another sort of license or another certification before you can work at those hospitals, I'm still advocating for those who work exclusively as an IBCLC. I do it all the time and provide that supporting documentation to let people know that the IBCLC is a standalone credential. And it really, when you think, well, gee, why do I have to do all of that work? The profession's only been around for 35 years, officially around for 35 years. So we have all of those thousands of IBCLCs in 122 countries in 35 years. And so, we're a young profession. And as we all know the importance of skilled lactation care, indeed, it may be us who are the advocate for ourselves, for our jobs, for building those coalitions and building those relationships. I noticed a question here in the chat, Sakita. Someone is asking a question about whether, what the difference is. There's a lot of different initials out there. There's quite the alphabet soup for lactation supporters. You've got peer counselors, you've got the mother support counselors, you've got CLS, CLC, CBS, which is ours, CLE, all sorts of things that are out there. And so to someone who is curious about the difference, they're all very similar to each other. I would recommend, and Wendy, I'm going to put you on the spot if you're available. The USLCA, the United States Lactation Consultant Association, actually has this really nice handout that shows the differences between IBCLC and the different certifications, and then people who are doing peer support. And I don't mean this to be in a hierarchy by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a grouping, right? So I could even say IBCLC, the different certifications, and peer supporters. Every single lactation support provider has value in the community, and it can be very overwhelming and sometimes confusing. And so it's really helpful if you can go to the USLCA website and find that document, which you should be able to do. I think you have to be a member in order to get the non-watermarked version, but you can actually see a thumbnail of it if you go onto their website.
So I also want to address this question, and I'm addressing it simply because I made a big mistake when I said this, and I had to think about this. But someone asked, is IBCLC the gold standard of lactation support? And I've said that in an interview, and I was so upset when I read it and was like, I said that. Like, anyways, no, I would say that there are different levels of lactation support. That's what I would say. I really don't like the hierarchies of saying one is better than the other. However, remember I talked about skill set. do you have the skill set to handle these abnormal and out of the normal type issues in lactation? And so that's what I would say. So how I liken it is, this is how I say, when you go to the emergency room and you got chest pain, and you just got chest pain probably because you got indigestion, you don't need to see a cardiologist, right? However, if you go to the ER and you have chest pain and you have some type of heart malfunction, you need to see a cardiologist. So I like to say it like that. As far as saying something is a gold standard, that's such a historical way of looking at how we deem the value of folks and professions. And I don't want to do that. I want to just uplift all lactation supporters for staying within their scope of practice. So in saying that, the IBCLC has a scope of practice that we live in, and as well as others, sometimes their other certifications have their scopes, right? And so that's how I'll answer that question. Angela.
That's a great one. Yeah, thank you so much, Sakita, and I agree with you 100%. And so thank you for that clarification. So another question here is, someone's asking, how long does it take to complete our 90-hour course plus the 5 hours of communication skills? It will take you over 95 hours to do that. So I'm just being real. As Sakita says, just real talk here. It's going to take you that much time, because there are links in our lessons that are going to lead you to other resources that you're going to want to review. Also, there is a book which is recommended, which is Breastfeeding and Human Lactation, Karen Wambach's book, which is recommended but not required. And the nice thing about having that book is so that you can go back and you can learn more information. So if you have a question in your practice, then you've got some sort of a resource. And there are several lactation books on the market, and we have found that one to be the most comprehensive, but it's not necessarily the best. So there are others out there that may fit your practice setting a little bit better. So it really depends upon that practice setting. Sakita, do you see anything else here?
I'm looking because there were lots of great questions, and I know Wendy seems like she's been busy answering a lot of them.
I agree.
So I just want to, check
What
out a
about,
couple.
there's a question here that says, I'm an RN with no maternal child experience. Would Pathway 3 be best for me? Also, do you recommend completing the 90-hour course through LER prior to starting or finding a mentor? So if you can answer the first half of that question, Sakita, I can answer the second.
So when you're an RN, you usually have some of those basic core classes. I'm going to preface that though first with saying, RNs, sometimes that you have a associate degree, sometimes you have a bachelor's degree. So I would say compare. So take the list of science courses that you see and compare it to what you had during nursing. And that if you have those classes, you should be covered. As far as having maternal child experience, that is not a prerequisite, nor is being an RN. And I like to make that, even though I am an RN, I like to make that very clear. There has been some language that I don't particularly like, and this is not, I'm going to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of LER, this is Sakita right now. The non RN IBCLC, that is something that's a language we need to just do away with. IBCLCs come from all different backgrounds, not just nursing. And I want to just make that very, very clear. So no, you do not need maternal child experience when you're talking about the pathways. What you need though is the fundamental hours that Angela talked about. Depending on your pathway, you need the education and the lactation specific education and the clinical hours, however you get those. So no, you do not need to be a maternal child. You don't need to have that experience.
Right. Also, the college courses really do help to prepare you for the exam. So I just want to make sure that that's
Yes.
clear. And so some people if we want the 90 hours after a course, we should do the enriched program. I would say yes. So the enriched program is that comprehensive piece, right? And it's going to give you that 90 hours of lactation specific education. Someone else asked about, do you get a certificate after each course? And the answer is you do get a certificate for completing that one individual course, but you have to finish, and our learning management system knows if you have completed each one of the individual components, and that will release, once you've completed everything, then that will release the certified breastfeeding specialist exam. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. And someone asked, is there a place where you can get employment while waiting to take the IBLCE exam? That again depends on your geopolitical region and it depends on your community and what you're able to access.
One of the things that I want to go back to is I mentioned about mentorship, finding a mentor. The best way to kind of get the nitty-gritty is if you have local breastfeeding coalitions in your area. Figure out where to go to sit at the meetings, or to figure out the landscape and where you are. Meet someone who can provide some of the background information in your area that would really give you a sense of what you're looking for as far as market, as far as really what the possibilities are in that area. And I think that is worth a whole lot more than kind of banking on blanket types of things. For instance, there are we talked about public versus private. There are some hospitals who will hire IBCLCs that do not have an RN license. And so there's this rule of thought that no, hospitals don't do that. And I'm here to tell you that yes, there are hospitals that do. So so it really is, we're not being evasive. Some of this is homework. Anything worth doing and having, sometimes it requires you to take a look at what's around me. What do I want to do, and do I have the passion to see this through? That is the biggest thing with this. And so when someone says, is it worth it, I said, to me it is, because this is my passion. I love doing what I'm able to do. But again, for you, double check and make those connections, and because this is an investment in your future, and you want to make sure that you are investing where you really are going to flourish and prosper from that investment.
Right. Right. I agree. And to those people who are curious about whether or not you need to complete the 90 hours before you find a mentor, our clinical director, Amy, does require you to have completed at least 75%. And the reason why is because how can you help families if you don't have the information? And so the two of them could be done in conjunction, but that's going to be really challenging. And the other question to ask yourself is, can I do that? This is really going to take me 95 hours to finish. Can I do that in addition to doing my clinical hours? For example, some people will contact me as a private practice lactation consultant and want me to be their mentor. And as much as I would love to, there are some days where I don't have a client. And so if you've arranged childcare in order to work with me as a private practice lactation consultant and I don't have any clients scheduled, then that can be hard. And yes, I do know that, you have to pay for childcare, you have to pay for certain things. And there are, I am aware of the privilege that is involved with being able to do some of these things. I do know some IBCLCs who will charge for their mentorship. There are no rules as to whether or not an IBCLC can charge for that mentorship. And so I think it really depends on your area. So definitely do your homework before you dive in with both feet.
So there's a question, and this is a real valid question. All of the questions are valid, but it's relevant, I would say, to the pandemic. And this one says, can you do hours everywhere in the world, specifically now during the pandemic? I am following Pathway 1. Yeah. Angela, you wanna talk about this? we did a meeting. We had a session yesterday on this. Angela, you can jump on in because Yeah.
So yes, you can. So the session that Sakita is referring to is we actually listened in on what the pathway to, so those the college courses. So we focused on 1 and 3 today because the pathway 2, they've got that mentorship piece, which is already included in the price. And what they're doing is they're doing all simulations. And Sakita and I haven't debriefed since then, but they're doing all online simulations with what is it? What kind of a student is it, or what kind of a clinical situation is it? There was a phrase, right?
Yeah, so they have a it seems like there was differences. Some did case studies and scenarios, some did, yeah. So I can't think of the word, but yeah, it was a lot of information yesterday.
It was
Very helpful. Very
exceedingly
helpful.
helpful. So the basic answer to your question is yes, you can, as long as it meets those criteria. So you could gather IBCLCs from around the world to mentor you. You need their signatures, though, on your Pathway 3 application. And you will also need to ensure that you've got that stable broadband, the up down speed. You're going to want to make sure that you've got that stable broadband in order to be able to allow for that two-way synchronous experience to support families. Also understand that sometimes people they'll contact me and they'll say, well, why can't you be my mentor or something like this, and many times I will say yes. However, it's really challenging. When we're working with new families, that's a really special space to be in. And sometimes it takes everything that I have to walk into that space with the appropriate humility and respect. I mean, if let's say I'm running late, traffic was really bad, and I show up in someone's home and the baby is crying, I mean, there's all of that. And then to add another person in there it's a special skill set to be able to manage the family that you're supporting in that moment, and then also to manage the intern. And so I do think that, I know it can be discouraging when you're looking for someone to mentor you. Remember that there's a lot to be mindful of there and to respect if an IBCLC, for example, says, maybe not now or maybe in 6 months. Also understand that I know some people who will do sort of like a trade. In other words, the mentor will ask the candidate to do additional work for them, such as helping with, pump rentals, let's say, or helping with, bookkeeping or accounting. So if you have another skill set, let's say you're amazing and you've got a marketing background and you can help that IBCLC to up their game, offer that barter with them in order to get that mentorship that you're looking for.
There's a question that says, I am an OBGYN for 20 years. How should I go about it? You would fall under pathway 1. And so you want to focus on pathway 1.
Right. Anyone who has a medical background, either as a nurse, and you'll notice that the IBLCE document was very broad. It said a nurse. I know here in the United States we have different types of nurses or different degrees, as Sakita referred to previously. And so note that it just is nurse. And so it's done intentionally. And so if you're a nurse, you can qualify under pathway 1, and you do not need that direct supervision as long as you are able to practice within your area as, let's say, an LPN, or let's say as a physician. If you have that practice, then yes, you can use pathway 1 in order to accrue your hours. Even for pathway 1 students, though, I would suggest finding an IBCLC just to touch base with, because frankly, thinking like an IBCLC is different than thinking as a provider. And so, for example, Sakita's an advanced practice nurse. And so she's nodding her head vigorously because it's different, right? To think as a provider and to think as an IBCLC. And I mean, Sakita, do you want to even address that?
Yeah, it is. It is different. And I will say, though, that it's different in a sense that depending on your background, whether you're a nurse, physician, you've learned certain ways of being that you find out you were worried about this and you haven't did a deep dive into what does the evidence say about this, right? Because it is a specialty. And by itself, standalone. And so I think that, yes, you learn how to think like a provider, and you learn how to think like a lactation consultant. And let me just give you an example of what that means. So as a labor and delivery nurse, you have a situation where you know a baby could be at risk for low blood sugar. And as a nurse, you're trained to really just be like on top of this, right? Oh, this is just a big deal. But as a lactation provider, you give babies a chance, within reason. You have to be able to think about really, 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 what is this baby telling you? Not the number on the machine of the glucometer. What is this baby telling you? Is this baby gearing up and just need just a few more minutes to get ready to latch? So I think, yes, that it is quite different, and we juggle many hats. But the best thing is being able to combine the best of both worlds, but also understanding that the lactation credential is a standalone credential. And so do I need that information as a nurse? No, I need those science courses that are specific, that's going to help me be able to think like a lactation consultant.
Right, right. Well, someone just put in the chat, because she'd asked the questions previously. And so she said she just finished her 90-hour course, and she took her final exam yesterday and she passed. So she's a certified breastfeeding specialist. So yay, way to go. Congratulations, right. I don't want to say your name just in case, you want to keep that confidential, but really congratulations. And so now you can start to accrue those clinical hours. And for those of you who are CBSs or others, if you can practice in your area as that sort of person, then that's fantastic. However, IBLCE with their Pathway 1 is pretty clear that you need to be a recognized healthcare provider within that list, or you need to be some sort of mother support counselor on that approved program. And so if you're unable to practice as a CPS in your area, then it would be best for you to follow Pathway 3, if that makes any sense. Oh, great. And this person has their hours as a labor and delivery nurse. So yay, congratulations. So thank you. So someone asks, they took all of the health sciences education requirements in university as a nurse. Do you need to take them again? No, you do not need to take them again. And you just need to say that you've gotten it. I would say get your transcript or get that documentation from your university in case your application happens to be one that's chosen for audit. And so IBLCE, you submit your application. This is not the Pathway 3. This is like once you're done with everything and you submit your application to IBLCE, they're going to accept it and make you a candidate to sit the exam. But I want to say there's a certain percentage that are called for audit. And so that's when you need to make sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row, right? That you've got some sort of listing from an accredited university that states that you have completed the courses that are required. And if you have your transcript, that suffices. So someone asks about the lactation education hours, lactation specific education. Yes, those are the ones that you receive through us. That's not on the job. On the job is the clinical hours. So there's the book learning, which is the 90 hours of lactation specific education. And then the second thing is the clinical hours that you need. And then there's also the health sciences background. Okay, great. Someone also asks that if, as a certified breastfeeding specialist, if you can charge as a certified breastfeeding specialist. Again, it depends on your area. I know in some areas where we have a lot of lactation support providers, those who are working exclusively as a CBS may have a challenge, for example, to get insurance companies to cover it. And that, again, every single state in the United States and territory is different with what they're able to, whether or not they're able to bill a third-party payer to receive compensation. And so that is that's a whole separate lecture in and of itself, is that billing piece.
I want to add to that that CBS just because some of the things I've seen recently in the community, which I'm questioning, the whole do no harm, is that if you do work as a CBS in the community, just be stay within your scope of practice. Um, and please don't fall out of that. And scope of practice means whatever um, your whoever provides your certificate, for instance, with LER, we have a scope of practice that you're not advising outside of that. If there is something that a person, something that you haven't seen before, that you're referring to the proper clinician. And that is that part about collaboration. The person is the center, but trust that we do a lot of collaborating between professions when it comes to infant feeding challenges or lactation person challenges. Even as a lactation consultant, I have well, I'm a nurse practitioner, but prior to becoming a nurse practitioner, and even actually, no, I still have to work collaboratively with OTs, ENTs, PT, whatever the case may be, physicians, the person's primary care provider. And so just be sure that if you do work in the community with the CBS, that again, you're staying within your scope and you're referring, and you have that collaborative piece. You have a lactation consultant that you can readily refer to if something does fall out of your scope of practice.
That's a good point. And something else is that, somebody else put in the chat that they've been working for many years in their community already and doing lactation support in their community. And the nice thing about having a mentor is because they're going to help you with that thinking like an IBCLC. When you're thinking like an IBCLC, then you can better pass the exam. Also, I know some people who say, gee, I've been practicing for all these years, why do I really need this? I have found, and I find people that struggle the most with this 90-hour education are people who may have been saying things that were accurate 20 or 30 years ago, and they're no longer. And, for example, I found someone recently, literally, who told me, well, at the doctor's office, they told me 15 and 15 on each side and then stop because the baby is done. That's from a long time ago. And now we know that, just as Sakita said, you follow the baby's cues. You ensure the baby is swallowing. You want to look for output. So you don't just necessarily go by the clock, you go by the baby. But this was literally yesterday. Someone asked me this question. And so I can understand their confusion. And so if you're continuing to give that information, the challenge is that, yes, you can accrue your hours. Let's say you're a nurse and you're giving this information out. You're not going to pass the exam. And so getting that lactation specific education, making sure that it's up to date, which ours is, we are constantly reviewing and updating our content on a daily basis. A new study comes out, someone pings us, and indeed we change it. The instructor reaches out to us and they're like, hey, there's this new study. It sort of changes what I gave. Can you change slide 38? We can literally take that audio, that slide, pop it into slide 38, done. So, I mean, it is fresh. We keep it up to date. And according to our ANCC requirements, we must review and update our content every 3 years. And so that's Sakita's day job. One of Sakita's many day jobs.
I'm laughing at just that you just said that, because I remember when I first started in maternal child nursing, we used to say 20 minutes on each side. And then I had my first child and I went home and she was 7 minutes and done. Now, again, talking about lived experience, would I tell somebody, oh, you only need 7 minutes? No, I would never do that, because we talk about feeding cues, we talk about wet diapers. But I could say I was neurotic. I was like, she won't stay for 20 minutes.
Right.
She only does 7. Yeah. So that just brought me back to that memory.
Well, and that's why your own personal breastfeeding experience doesn't count towards your clinical hours, right? And I know some people who've nursed for a heck of a long time, right? And they're like, what do you mean I have to go get more? And I'm like, Sorry, yeah, it just doesn't count. So let's see. Someone asks us, so there's a test at the end of the 90 hours, then a board exam after the internship, correct? Yeah, and so it's separate organizations. So the 90 hours is us. We have our own certified breastfeeding specialist exam. That is separate, completely separate from IBLCE. And so and that's just it with some people who are asking about all the different initials. Every different group has their own trademarked certification. And frankly, it depends on where you are in the country and in the world with which one of these certifications you know, but it's not necessarily that one is better than another, right? Okay. So someone who says they're a nurse but don't remember taking a specific nutrition class in nursing school, should you take one just in case you get audited? I think it depends on how easy that is for you to do. The fact that you are an RN is going to cover it. So it's not required for you to do it. But as a colleague of mine said once, when she decided to sit the exam, she hadn't taken, anatomy and physiology for 30 years. And so she actually went back and she took it. And she said it was a marvelous refresher on what to know and how to know it. So that was just super helpful.
Someone asked about how do you get information about private practice? And I don't want to promo anybody's stuff because I don't want to,
I was just about to do that in the chat.
Commercial bias or anything, but I do want to say that there's tons of information and people out there who can get you the information you're seeking about private practice. There are Facebook groups, there are, social media groups, and again, people who make a living teaching people how to do this. And so I would say do a little Google search and you should hit the jackpot.
Yes, it's very true. There are several people who are coming out and to support each other. And also, I can say though that Nikki and Nikki. So if you're not familiar with Nikki and Nikki, they have an amazing social media presence. Full disclosure, Nikki Hunter Greenaway and Nikisha Killings are the Nikki and Nikki team, and they actually work as instructors for LER, as well as they're going to have a course, a live class tomorrow on the 9th of December on wrapping up 2020 and visioning and goals for 2021. And so they were so instrumental and so helpful during the COVID, when COVID first broke out. And we were, as Sakita mentioned, we were scrambling, we were looking, what do I need to do? How can I continue to offer to support? Should I continue to offer support? And Nikki and Nikki helped us to create the documents that are free on our website that actually says, what's your algorithm? How do you make that decision? If you do decide to go into a family's home, what PPE do you need? What resources do you need? And then if you are going to provide telehealth, what does that look like, right? So Nikki and Nikki have an amazing practice, an amazing following, and I would highly recommend taking a look at their content in order to see, what are some of those things that you need to do when starting a private practice, or reach out to them and ask them specifically, who can we talk to, who can we engage with, how can we find out more information?
There's a question that says, just to be clear, if you're a breastfeeding counselor, you do not need to do the 14 hours of college education. The only time you don't need to do the 14 hours of college education is if you've already taken those courses. If you've never taken those courses, you need to take them. The reason why the question, I'm answering it this way, is because if you're a breastfeeding counselor, you could have still had these courses by taking maybe dietitian courses. I don't know. So that's why I'm answering it. So just to be real clear, if you've never taken these particular courses, you would need to take them.
Good point. Very good point. Good. So there's someone in the chat who has finished their 90 hours, and they're also someone who's already certified and they are working in the community. Which pathway should you choose? So if you're and this person is a clinical medical assistant. So the medical assistant is not listed as a pathway 1 person. So unless you become a certified, some sort of certified counselor through one of the recognized breastfeeding mother support organizations, then I would say your answer is pathway 3. Do I know how many people are taking the 90-hour course currently? A lot. I don't know. I mean, we have so many people in the course, and everyone is in a different phase, right? You know, it's like you get started with it and you're really excited about it and you jump on that 90-hour course, and then life, right? You know, COVID and family and just everything ensues. And so with all of that, you know, just want to say that that, you know, if you are taking the 90-hour course, you know, if you're on Facebook, do take a look at our Facebook group, ask to join it. You can send an email if you're already, you know, if you're on Facebook, you can actually go to that Facebook group and ask to become a member of the group. And so I would suggest ask to become a member of that group and or reach out to support@lactationtraining.com. And Wendy, Julie, or Kim will be able to set you up. They'll make sure that you are enrolled in one of our courses and they can pop you into the Facebook group. So that's one way to do it. Also, if you've got questions, you know, you can just reach out and you know, connect with people. You know, we're also trying to find ways to have CBSs engage with each other. And so that is, you know, another aspect of it too. So please know that we would love to continue with that engagement, and we're here to support you in that. So yes, you can reach out to me and Sakita. We can, as a matter of fact, I was just chatting with someone yesterday. I live in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And I work with this one person who is a certified breastfeeding specialist. And she was super excited when we had a meeting and she noticed that 2 of the other people in that meeting were also certified breastfeeding specialists. And so she was like, oh my goodness, other CBS in the house. This is great. So she was really excited to find those people. And it is hard. You know, we are isolated by this, you know, by the area, by not being able to get out to get to conferences and things like that. So it is a challenge. I understand that completely.
The other thing I want to add to the CBS is that I've had the opportunity, and I want to address this because we talked about IBCLC being a standalone. I worked in the hospital with a CBS, alongside a CBS, who worked with me in a hospital setting. And so again, I will preface this by saying, depending on what's in your area, check around and see. Sometimes you have to create your own position. You have to go in and say, hey, this is my scope of practice. This is what they're doing in this area, and this is how I can be helpful, right? And so, again, you know, my daughter said something. She said, if you can't be an advocate for yourself, how are you going to be an advocate for other people? And so she said that in an interview, and it just hit home with, we are pressing the limit. Again, Angela mentioned that this profession is fairly new, and so it's going to take a lot of us to move the needle in these areas for lactation support.
This is very true. So I think I'd like to end on that note, but there was one last question in the chat, which is talk about the new communications requirement. Does a college communications course count, or is it something specific? It needs to have 5 hours of communications, and I think most college courses are 3. And so I would say that the answer is no. Also, the communication skills, you know, you want to allow for, and I'm sure the college course may have done this, but you want to allow for that dialogue, for that counseling skills, and for that communication skills dialogue. And I will say, as someone who has written that content, that it's changed in the past 20 years. Whereas we had one mindset and one theoretical approach to providing information with counseling and communication skills, it has changed within the past few years. You know, concepts that Sakita mentioned earlier, such as shared decision making, and another topic that that I really try to encourage with my, you know, students is this concept of you know, unconditional positive regard. Right? Knowing that the patient is doing what is best for themselves. It may not be what you would choose, but you want to give that unconditional positive regard to every patient that you serve and every client that you serve. And so shared decision making, things like that should help. And so is there anything that you can take in place of that course as far from a social worker's degree? I don't know. I'm going to say no, but I think the best would be to contact IBLCE and to ask them. And it does take a little bit of time to get a response from IBLCE, but I highly recommend that, yes, please do check with IBLCE to see, because that's a very good question and a very specific question, and I want to make sure that you get the right answer so you don't do something that you don't need to do. As a matter of fact, if you have a degree, a bachelor's in social work, chances are you could teach the course. And so I don't, though, want to give you the wrong answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, because so much of communication, I think of when we're talking about lactation support, is also that trauma-informed lens of communicating and understanding that, lactating people are really in a vulnerable state at that point. And so, yeah, it's a lot to consider. So there may be some course in social work that could kind of cover some of that piece. So that was a great answer, Angela.
Great. Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. I am going to answer this one more question in the chat. So, Sakita, if you want to close us out here.
Yes. So thank you for joining us again. I want to point out that, as Angela said in the beginning, you can always contact us at LER at lactation support at lactationtraining.com, and we'll be able to answer your questions. But do reach out. If you're in the 90-hour course, join a Facebook group. You will be amongst friends and people who are really have some of the same questions you have, and it also becomes your people, your support group. So email us with questions. Good luck on your journey. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing some of these names in the future, paving the way for us all.
Agreed. Thank you so much.